And welcome back to Coast. Tom Horn back with us. Tom, of course, researcher, freelance writer, Raiders News Update, reporting on all kinds of incredible information. He's also one of the authors of Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, and also the Nephilim Stargates. And here he is on Coast to Coast. Tom, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, George, it's great to be back with you again.
What is going on at the Vatican and ETs?
Well, I have to tell you, man, it has been absolutely crazy. You know, we did shows with you last year on Petrus Romanus.
Yep.
And recall that we predicted that Benedict was going to resign. And we, of course, used the prophecy of the popes, the Malachi or Morgare's prophecy that's kind of on everybody's mind right now. The idea that this current Pope, Pope Francis, is the final pontiff, and no matter what you make of it, he is the last one on the list. And when we were doing these shows on the prophecy of the popes, I kept getting all these calls. I think I got them when I was on Coast to Coast with you last time. People saying, yeah, but what do you make of the Vatican ET connection? And it's interesting that in some way the public seemed to be connecting more with the Vatican ET question than they were even with the prophecy of the popes. This has all been extrapolated to a great deal more. I'm busy as I can possibly be, partly, by the way, because I had gone on the Hagman and Hagman show with Steve Quayle 3 weeks before Benedict stepped down, and I said that his resignation was imminent. Well, then 21 days later, when he stepped down, my phone was ringing off the hook, and everybody wanted to know who my insider at the Vatican was, right? Yeah. So here we have it. The Benedict did step down, just like we predicted. And, oh, by the way, in our book, we said that he would step down in March or April of 2012. And then later in the book, we said, but if he doesn't step down in March or April of 2012, he's certain to step down before the end of 2013. Well, when he did resign just last month, in February 11, the New York Times ran an article called A Statement Rocks Rome, and in that article, they interviewed Giovanni Maria Vian, who is the editor of the Vatican-owned newspaper, the El Observatore Romano. And in that interview, he confirmed that Pope Benedict actually, officially, handed in his resignation in March 2012, at exactly the time that we said he was going to. He did it internally. He did it privately to a half dozen members of the Curia, the Vatican government. And then, according to the New York Times article, it was kept in a strict reserve, a secret confidence that nobody could share, not even with other cardinals. And then, essentially what he did was he actually just made it public knowledge when he stepped down officially in February. So, in a very strange way, we were actually right in that prediction in both cases.
What were those signs, Tom, that you saw then?
Well, the signs that we saw, partly, it was just reading tea leaves. In other words, we could see his health was failing. And he himself he is a theologian for the church, and he had argued that if a pope got to the point that he could no longer carry out his functions, that it would be okay under Catholic rules, law, for a pope to abdicate the throne of Peter, to step down. His brother, you remember last year, was saying that he wasn't doing well. He's a priest too, and he was encouraging Benedict to step down. But having said all of that, you know, popes don't step down. Obviously, you always get sick before you die, right? And popes are supposed to stay in office until they die.
That's right.
And so that was only part of it. You might also recall that we had found a 61-year-old codex that had actually been written by a Jesuit priest. He was a Belgian priest, and he had named it The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes. It was written in French. There's only 2 copies in the world that we know of. We found one that was hidden under a bunch of dust at Yale University, and we negotiated a scanned copy of it, translated it into English, and 61 years ago, Jesuit René Thibault said that the Pope who would step down to make way for the final one on the Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes list would do so in April of 2012. He predicted that 61 years in advance, and he was absolutely right. So now he was a mystic, and he approached it as a mathematician, a code breaker. He was an anagram solver. He was an academic for the Catholic Church. He taught in the university there in Egenhoven, but he was also a Catholic mystic, and so there was a lot of prediction going on there. So basically, it was 600 pages of analysis. Now, of course, that book has become an international bestseller since the Pope did step down, like we said he was going to. We're doing all kind of TV shows and stuff. And by the way, thank you very much for having me back on Coast to Coast AM. It's always a pleasure to be here, an honor. But to get back to your question, while we were doing all these shows, and I think this also happened on Coast to Coast, people who would call in kept asking us about, what do you make of the Vatican ET connection? Why is the Vatican spokespersons, and especially the Jesuits, which I think is also related to the election of this new Pope, why are they out there now talking so much about a dynamic ET reality? They're hosting conferences there in Rome. They're inviting experts from all over the world to come in and talk about what will the impact on religion be if official disclosure of extraterrestrial intelligence is made. And so what happened was, with so many people calling in asking all these questions, I asked my co-author, Chris Putnam, I said, what do you think about a new investigation? But if we're going to do this, I mean, we got to do it right. I think we did that with Petrus Romanus. We hired private investigators. Remember, we even looked into the murder of Father Edward Coons. So we took it very seriously in that work we did last year. And I wanted to do the same thing this time around, so we brought in people who could simply compile information, go through something like 20-some thousand pages of documents and information. But for me and Chris, I thought it would all start by he and I going basically where the rubber meets the road, right? We wanted to go to the Vatican's astronomical technology.
Oh, you're going right to the source. We
wanted to go right to the source. And so we negotiated that through the university there, University of Arizona, which controls who can or cannot go up on that mountain. You can't just simply go up there. It's basically like trying to climb a goat's trail to get up there anyway, but then the gates are all locked and all these different languages warning that you can't, pass by their locked gate. So we did that through the University of Arizona. To make a long story short, we wanted to meet with the observers who are approved to operate the Vatican's Astronomical Technology Telescope. And I can tell you, George, not only were we not disappointed, we were actually amazed with the openness with which the astronomers at all three of the telescopes on the top of that mountain were willing to give us. They spent the entire day with us. The Jesuit father on duty that day, we actually have him on film telling us that the most important research occurring with the Vatican astronomers is the quest to pinpoint certain extrasolar planets and advanced alien intelligence.
Isn't that amazing? Because I've always wondered, Tom, what the heck is the Vatican doing with observatories?
Well, they're studying deep space, and don't forget, that question was asked on Coast to Coast AM in the 90s when Art Bell asked Father Malachi Martin why was the Vatican so heavily invested in the study of deep space on the top of Mount Graham in Arizona, the very place we went. And I know you know his reply was that they're there because at the highest levels of Vatican administration, they know what is approaching the Earth, and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. So
Wormwood.
He spilled the beans on something. And there is something, by the way. There's something that's being watched up there. The Vatican Observatory is the first telescope that we went to while we were there. We met with the Jesuits. They gave us leave of the entire building. They let us climb around on the platforms. They unhooked the chains to let us get up on the,
Well, I guess there's nothing proprietary, right? You're just looking at hardware.
We're looking at hardware. They invited us to come inside the control room to look at the computer screens that were fixed on certain spaces in deep space. But, George, they also were very, very open. In fact, one of the things that astonished us was how open they were with talking about UFOs. In fact, the Vatican, the Jesuit at the Vatican, but also the engineer that met us at the Large Binocular Telescope, which is on top of the mountain there, it's part of the group of telescopes, 3 telescopes up there, but it's the big one. And he spent about 5 hours, I would guess, that day with us, and gave us complete access to all 7 floors of that mighty machine, showed us the Lucifer device that is up there and being used by all of the, whatever they call them. There's a consortium, in other words, of astronomers that use that up there. He too said the same thing. He told us that UFOs in deep space, what appear to be intelligently operated craft in deep space, are constant. And especially when they're using the Lucifer device.
All right, hold on for a second, Tom. I want to talk more about that Lucifer device and also the ET contact. Tom Horn with us right here on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. Well, I'm so pleased to tell you that our iPhone and Android apps are up and running and out, and we are getting just incredible response. You can download it. The app is free, by the way, but of course, for you Coast Insiders, it does everything you need. Take advantage of it. Just go to coasttocoastam.com or the iTunes store or the Android store. And back with Tom Horn, whose websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com for you. Tom, we were talking about the UFOs that are out there. I also want to talk with you about the Book of Revelation and Wormwood, which might be the object they're trying to track to with those observatories. But what do you pick up? What is the Lucifer device anyway?
Yeah, well, we were talking about Mount Graham, and the term I couldn't remember a minute ago is the Mount Graham International Observatory. Anyway, on the top of the mountain, there's those 3 telescopes, and it's at the Large Binocular Telescope where you find the Lucifer device, and that's an acronym. It's a big, long, tortured phrase that they came up with to try to make it fit the acronym Lucifer. Basically, this is an instrument that observes in the near-infrared wavelength range. It sits in between the 2 giant, almost 30-foot wide diameter telescope mirrors inside the LBT. And by the way, I should say that that's currently one of the world's most advanced systems, and it's the largest, right now anyway, the largest telescope of its kind in the world. I understand they're building a bigger one somewhere else, but right now it's the biggest one, and so it gets astronomers, famous people from all over the world wanting to be able to use it. And the importance of the infrared Lucifer device is that it can detect objects that are too far away or that are faint to be observed in visible light, like distant planets, nebula, brown dwarf stars, so on. Infrared radiation has longer wavelengths than visible light, and that means that it can pass through gas, dust, without getting scattered. So objects, areas that are obscured from view in the visible spectrum, can be viewed by using Lucifer's infrared technology. Okay. For example, UFO researchers have fascinated for a long time about how infrared tech can be used to spot and track unidentified flying objects in the heavens that can't be seen with other telescopes or the naked eye. And in fact, some of the most astonishing UFOs ever caught on film have been recorded with infrared, and people can go to YouTube and just type in infrared UFO and see some of those astonishing UFOs over there.
I saw some, Tom, with some night vision goggles. You could not see them with the naked eye, but you put these goggles on, and there they were, darting all over the place. Yeah,
and that's what the technician, when we got towards the end of the visit we had there at the Large Binocular Telescope that day, we went up into the control room, and that's a really big control room. It's real long. It's got computer screens going everywhere, and there must have been 7 or 8 astronomers sitting in there while we were in there, and a whole bunch more of them in the lunchroom around the corner, and the Germans were there working on different things. And but he sat there and showed us their screens and talked about how common UFOs are. So much to the point that it was almost like it was just blasé, right? Like they were just bored with watching these armadas in deep space. We found that to just be extraordinary. But there is a connection, even though the Vatican Observatory is not the one that has the Lucifer device in it. There is a connection. In fact, if you go to the Vatican Observatory website, right on the website concerning the Lucifer device is a heading that's intriguing, The heading is, quote, NASA and the Vatican's infrared telescope called Lucifer, a German-built, NASA and the Vatican-owned and funded infrared telescope for looking at Nibiru nemesis.
Amazing.
Quote, that's right on there.
Who would want to call a telescope or anything Lucifer?
Well,
even if it's, an acronym for something.
Right. The Jesuits will say they didn't have any part in the naming of the infernal Lucifer instrument. What they don't point out, though, to the public is that they have access to using it, and they do use it, and they're an integral part of the whole complex of Mount Graham International Observatory, and as such, they're connected, by the way, to the very consortium. The German astronomers that did name Lucifer are part of the odious Max Planck Institute. That's the group, that gave assistance to the murderous experiments of Nazi scientist Dr. Mengele in the 1940s. They're the ones that did name it, and one of the Jesuits said they thought they named it that way just so they could poke fun at the Jesuits next door. But then one of the things we did following our visit there that day, when we came down off the hill, Brother Guy Cosmonalgo did not happen to be at the VAT that day, and he was one of the guys that I wanted to talk to, so we contacted him directly, and he gave us 4 interviews from Rome. And but he indicated that the Borg, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, the Borg, not the Borg, but the Borg, that they have a Jesuit point man in the search for alien planets that uses the Lucifer device. His name's Father Paul Gabor, and actually he has a PhD thesis from Paris Observatory on doing that very work, astrobiology, the search for exoplanets, and so on. One of the other things, George, that we found to be extraordinary the day that we were there, and then afterward following up with some of the Native American Indians that live around there, we heard a lot when we were at Mount Graham about how the native people did not want the Vatican to put that observatory on the top of that mountain. They didn't want the LBT or anybody else up
Why
there
not?
either. They formed a lawsuit against them. They got environmentalists to join a lawsuit with them, and actually the government in Arizona, Congress, basically had to do an in-run around environmental law in order to allow the construction on the mountain. And to answer the question, why not? It's because Mount Graham is one of the 4 holiest mountains in the Americas for Native American people. And it is because, George, it is for them what we would call in our terminology a stargate. It is a portal. It is, for the Native Americans, Mount Graham is a sacred location that goes way back into their history, and it is a place where doorways open, where supernaturalism, metaphysical occurrences occur, and things move in and out of that reality. And so for them, it wasn't just holy because the Native American Indians had lived and died there, before the white man came, but it was because it's a supernatural place. Not too far from there is what they call the Superstition Mountains, and that's where bad medicine, according to their holy men, unfolds. But so we found that out. And so we followed up with the American Indian, the Apache, by the way, the San Carlos Apache, and found that not only is it universally associated with deities and spirits that can move in and out of that location, but they have a whole mythos. For instance, they have a creation myth associated with that region, in which the time before time, there was this giant disc that descended down from out of heaven.
There you go.
And in it sat a bearded man, and he was the creator, and he begins creating. Not long after, another entity comes through. He looks like a man, but he's not really a man. He's a dragon. And he is a deceiver, and he starts deceiving the American tribes. But furthermore, George, they describe entities, for instance, some of their folklore around owls, and why they don't like owls. The owl, to the Apache Indian, dreaming of an owl signifies approaching death.
Well, it's funny, in the movie The Fourth Kind, that's what people saw, an owl-looking creature.
That's exactly right. It's actually part of the whole ufological legends. In fact, owls associated throughout Christian history, too, with sorcery, flying witches, flying things, but it's also mirrored in abduction tales. We found that to just be extraordinary, that so much of what they write about there is comparable in two different ways. One, it seems very much to compare with much of what's said in ufology, where the owl, how does the story go? The abductee sees an alien gray, but they are convinced that it really wasn't a gray. It's just your mind is pregnant with the image of an owl that you saw somewhere at some time.
Well, in Mothman, people thought Mothman looked like an owl as well, remember?
Yeah, that's exactly right. But when you talk to the natives there, they describe the same stuff, the same kind of stuff, the discs that come down, the bearded man, the creators that came in the time before time, the deceivers who also came through these portals. And one of the things that we conclude in our new book, Exo Vaticana, is that we believe that the Vatican specifically chose to work with NASA for that mountain, and NASA probably did too, partly because there's something going on there. And I know, that seems to be like stretching, credulity or something here.
Not really.
But that's the belief system, and it is hundreds of years old concerning Mount Graham. And so that was one thing we didn't expect to see. Now, the San Carlos, they preserved an ancient tale from their early history, and they also talk about a race of giants known as the Jindupids, and these were judged and destroyed by the Great Father, the Sun. In fact, the enormous Phoenix metropolitan area, which has Maricopa County and Pinal counties, you often hear it referred to as the Valley of the Sun. Well, that's because, according to the Indian legend, there was a race of Indians. They were called the Tartans. They lived in that valley. They were peaceful farmers. And one day, they're invaded by these Jindupids, which are Goliaths. I mean, they use tree limbs for toothpicks, according to legend. Nephilim. And they're led by this massive man that's named Evilkin, who comes from the northeast. He's headed to the south, and they're on their way to the Gulf of Baja. But these giants nearly wipe out the Tartans, and the Tartans hide themselves underground in the mountains. But that's when the Father-Son throws this huge fireball, meteorite or something like that, and it sears the monstrous giants into the scorched mountain rock. Their lore also seems to agree with, some of the stuff in the higher mountains that David Flynn and people like that have written about in the past.
And let me ask you this, Tom, and then we're going to take calls with you next hour. Wormwood, which is described in the book of Revelation as an object that approaches the planet. Is it possible that the Vatican Observatory is looking for that?
Well, absolutely they might be. And again, most intriguing was Father Malachi Martin, who before he died said that the reason they have that observatory up there is that they're watching something that is approaching the Earth. Now, there is, it's the Catholic prophecy of the Great Comet. And some people thought that Malachi Martin might have been referring to that, but others say no, he was referring to the near future arrival of alien intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, when we interviewed Father Guy Cosmonalgo, one of the questions I asked him was what he thought of Malachi Martin's claims that Cosmonalgo, who splits his time between Mount Graham and then the smaller observatory that they have in Gandolfo, right, Italy, he's the keeper of the Pope's meteorites, right? So what he thought of Malachi Martin, he actually seemed to be miffed. He told me, he said, I've heard stories about the late Malachi Martin, and I'm really suspicious of statements that came from him. And he told me how he was at the observatory in the 90s, and Malachi never visited them, never had anything to do with them, and he actually just seemed to be kind of perturbed by the whole question.
Of course, we have to find out, maybe they're trying to discredit him at the same time.
Well, see, that's what I thought. In fact, it came across to me as being consistent with how many other Catholic priests actually despised Malachi's willingness to disclose what Rome otherwise wanted buried, including the satanic cabal within the Jesuit order that Malachi wrote about in his best-selling books, including the one called The Jesuits. And I think there's absolutely could be something to that. And don't forget, it was Malachi who, long before the public knew anything about the pedophilism that was going on among some of the priests, was Malachi who came out, was talking about it publicly, and even connected it to satanic activity. In other words, it wasn't just perversion, they were specifically involving, or at least some of the priests were involving themselves with pedophilism for the purposes of creating a kind of satanic energy, and it was very sorcerous.
Something's going on, Tom. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the thing that's most extraordinary, after we were finished with talking with Jose Funes, talking with Guy Cosmonalgo, some of the stuff that Cosmonalgo told us was extraordinary. We won't even have time on this show to go into all of this, but some of these Jesuits believe that official disclosure is imminent. And furthermore, they're creating some very strange theology. And by that I mean, we're talking about Opus Dei level theologians who are writing papers now for the Pope's Academy in Rome, for other institutions of the Roman Catholic Church, that are to be used for creating new dogma. And some of the stuff they're talking about, people are going to be blown away by some of the documents that Guy Cosmonalgo gave me. And when he's talking about how the world is soon going to look to the aliens for their salvation, and the arrival of alien saviors. And I pressed him on some of these questions. I said, well, can you give me an example? I mean, what are you talking about? Is this something, as a brother, you're a Jesuit, you're a brother, that you would find in the Bible somewhere? And believe it or not, to prove his point that there are alien saviors who once before visited the earth and were advanced in their technology and gave the secrets of heaven to mankind, to prove that point, he pointed me to Genesis chapter 6 and literally wrote about the Nephilim. He, in his response to me, talking about the Nephilim, the heroes that were of old, the warriors of renown. And I emailed him back and I said, Brother Cosmonalgo, does the Vatican, do you and other top astronomers, do you actually mean to use the story of the Nephilim from the Bible as an example of the kind of space saviors that man will soon look to for salvation? And he answered in the affirmative, and then gave me the most incredible assertion, in that he quoted John 10:16, which says, "Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice." And he said about that, he said, and I'm going to just quote the email he sent me, quote, "Perhaps it's not so far-fetched to see the second person of the Trinity, the Word, who was present in the beginning," John 1:1, talking about Jesus Christ, "coming to lay down his life and take it up again, not only as the Son of Man, but also as a child of these other races," end quote. That's his quote. And so then I emailed him back and I said, whoa, so not only the Nephilim, Vatican scholars believe that Jesus might have been the star child of an alien race. That's what you just said, that he's a child of these other races.
Yeah.
And I asked him, do you and the Jesuits actually secretly hold that the virgin birth was in reality an alien abduction scenario in which Mary was impregnated by E.T., giving birth to the hybrid Jesus? And at that point, he would not answer that question, but that was exactly what he said.
And it's happening now to millions of people.
It is happening to millions of people. And by the way, I talked to you one time, a long time ago, George, about a situation in my family involving my sister. But I will tell you something that I haven't said on radio until now. It's in this book for the first time in my life. It's going to explain to a lot of people why I've always had an interest in this area. It's the biggest secret in the book, Exo Vatican. It's something I've kept buried my entire adult life. It's remained sealed due to a binding agreement, actually, a settlement between members of my family, state authorities, and federal investigators. Part of this has to do with a family member.
All right, well, tell us the secret when we come right back, Tom. Plus, we'll take some phone calls with you. We've got a split show for you tonight, so we've got Tom Horn for another hour. Your calls, back in a moment. Tom Horn with us, his latest work, Exo Vaticana, with Chris Putnam, of course. We're going to take your calls this hour and chat with him more about this big secret he had. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Tom Horn with us. Tom, before we go to calls, tell us this great secret here.
Yeah, well, in this new investigative book, Exo-Vaticana, that you mentioned a moment ago, not only do we tell the secrets of the Jesuit astronomers, and by the way, publish their secret files, which we ascertain, but we tell for the first time a secret from my family that has to do with a family member who was a nuclear physicist with the uppermost security clearance doing research into nuclear and biological warfare at General Atomics in San Diego, California. And at one point, this family member was transferred from General Atomics to Los Alamos National Laboratory in northern New Mexico, where he was involved with a top secret project, the details of which we were oblivious to. Of course, as you know, George, that's the same facility that was founded during World War II as a covert laboratory to coordinate the Manhattan Project, the Allied undertaking to develop the first nuclear weapons. But more sinisterly, the site's been connected to an alleged secret alien underground facility beneath the Archuleta Mesa on the New Mexico border near Dulce. And it's also been connected to genetic experiments on humans, UFOs, 5 alien bodies, extraterrestrial biological entities that were recovered from the 1947 Roswell crash that were purportedly sent to a safe house there at the Los Alamos National Lab. But it was during that time, while this member of my family was conducting top secret research for the U.S. government at Los Alamos, and one night after he returned home, and under the influence of alcohol, he stated that the laboratory where he was working was involved with the so-called alien agenda. And he bragged of things I'm not going to talk about on the internet or write online, but it's in the book. Part of it's in the book. And as people will learn, what happened next speaks for itself, because after he stated what he did, he disappeared. And he's never been heard from again.
Where'd he go?
Nobody knows. And that story, by the way, involves government counselors that can only be thought of as highly placed covens within national agencies that direct so-called alien abductees according to protocols. In fact, the most explosive of which was uncovered by a federal investigator working with another family member, my sister, over which a particular state had to monetarily settle with her and a dozen other experiencers, as the abductees are called, in which an agreement was reached for their silence. Now, George, I personally attended 2 of those meetings in which the investigator and the attorneys for both sides were in attendance, and this was held inside the state building of that state where the agreement was reached. And once people know that story, it has been buried since the 1960s. It was, when I was a pastor, this was absolutely not something that I was able to talk about, but people will understand why I've had an interest in the phenomenon, the so-called alien abduction and hybridization scheme. But this is a major story. This was my sister's husband, and when he disappeared, she could not get any information from Los Alamos. They finally told her that he had died on the job in an accident. And when she tried to get the body for burial, they wouldn't give her the body, and they said it was a national security issue. Now, her daughter happens to be a federal employee with the Social Security Division, and she told her to apply for survivor benefits, which she couldn't get because she didn't have a body. She couldn't get a death certificate because Los Alamos said that if they worked to help her get a death certificate, then the death could be investigated, and that was not something they were going to allow. Anyway, big story, but it happened to a woman who is an experiencer, my sister, married to a nuclear physicist, doing work. Both of them get drunk one night, and they're talking about stuff they shouldn't be talking about. Now, was the house bugged? Was there something more supernatural about it? We don't know, but he disappeared, never to be found again, and that whole story is there. There's a lot more to that story, including we published in the book a picture of what might be the very first time a true alien presence was captured on film. It was there for 1 second, but the camera was running. I had that picture analyzed by a crime lab, and they determined that it was not Photoshop, that whatever is there is a true anomaly. It's a and it looks exactly like an alien gray standing half inside of a frame. Anyway, a lot more to that people will learn for the first time. That's not what the book's about, by the way, but it is part of one of the chapters in that book.
Tom, the discussion of ETs that go all the way back, Sumeria, you name it, Sumer, how much of it is tied into the thought that they saw ETs, but they thought they were gods?
Well, that's a solid universal story, and you're right. Cultures around the world documented events. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Hebrews, the ancient Chinese telling of a primeval war between flying carts, the Sanskrit text, the Dronaparva, Egyptians describing Ra as navigating the heavens in a flying boat.
Yeah.
And Horus descends down, and he flies through the heavens on winged discs that shine with many colors. There's all kinds of documents to that effect, hieroglyphics. There's the Osiris and Isis myth that claim that Horus was born to Isis only after she impregnated herself with semen that was taken from the corpse of Osiris. All of this sounds very much like advanced science. But
genetics,
when you look at the Metanurk stela, which is a magical medical stela that's part of the Egyptian collection of the Metropolitan Museum there in New York City. And it describes how Isis sent forth a cry to heaven and addressed her appeal to the boat of millions of years. And the celestial disk came and stood still and moved not from where it was. And Thoth came down from the disk. And he says, "Oh, Isis, this and that." You cannot go into any of the ancient cultures that you don't find this story of Earth being visited. Well, just like at Mount Graham with 100-year-old orally histories that have been passed down from one generation to the next of their creation myth. And here again, the great disk, it comes down, the creator's inside of it. So it's a very realistic story. Now, our interest, of course, with the Vatican was why they're talking about it as being a current phenomenon, why they're even predicting in some of these documents that it's a current phenomenon. And so that you have smack dab in the middle of this conspiracy, not just NASA and aeronautic administrations like the European space agencies, but the Vatican inserting itself into this question of astrobiology and the possibility of official disclosure and what the discovery or the disclosure of a dynamic ET reality might mean for the future of faith. And that really is what our investigation was about. And by the way, in a lot of ways, it makes perfect sense that in the middle of official disclosure, you would find the Vatican.
Of course. They may be the go-between.
Well, that's the point. And by the way, the fact that we now have a pope who is a Jesuit,
yeah.
Because it's the Jesuit astronomers for the church that are writing a great deal of this information. And what's interesting is we sent our book to the typesetter and then to the printer before Bergoglio was elected as Pope Francis I. But we were talking a great deal in there about how the new pope would have to be sympathetic to the Jesuits in order to do what we think he's going to do, and that's actually create a dogma that and this is Funes now, by the way. We interviewed Funes. We have him on record as saying that in the near future, the dogma from the Vatican will be that if you don't believe in extraterrestrials and the message they bring, that's the heresy. Believing in them will no longer be heresy. Not believing in them will be equivalent to heresy. But to get back to your point, the most powerful church on earth, sure, they'll be at the middle of it. They've got their own diplomatic corps of ambassadors posted throughout the industrialized nations of the world. They are uniquely positioned and have been actively preparing for an official disclosure moment. In fact, you remember George, how Corrado Balducci, the Monsignor, before he died,
the late,
during his life, he was not just an exorcist and a theologian and a member of the Vatican Curia, the governing body there at Rome, but he was the official mouthpiece of the church concerning the reality, not just of aliens, but aliens here on Earth now.
Well, and they never shut him up.
They never did.
Nope. They always let him say what he wanted to say.
They let him say what he did, and they never corrected the fact that he also said, and people can go to YouTube and watch him on Italian television with translations, where he's talking about how the Vatican was not only aware of the alien presence, but they were using their embassies. This is what he says. They were using their embassies to quietly compile material evidence from around the world on the extraterrestrials and their mission. And that, too, the Vatican never corrected. They never refuted that revelation. So, in any case, it makes perfect sense that a church with their power, reach, both political and spiritual, are certainly going to be that body, that religious body, that the world is going to turn to. I mean, if we all woke up tomorrow morning and mile-wide UFOs were hovering over the cities, people are probably not going to rush off to Walmart to buy a new coat. I mean, they're going to be frozen in their tracks, and I can imagine that here into the well of the United Nations is going to walk the president of Russia, the leader of the United Kingdom, the president of the United States, and together with them is obviously it's going to be the Pope and probably other religious leaders from among the Muslims and whatever, and they're going to say, folks, we have an announcement to make. They're here.
They are here. Coming. Let's take some calls, Tom. You ready?
Sure.
We've got John in Seattle, Washington, west of the Rockies. Go ahead, John.
Hey, George. How you doing?
Good, John.
And, Tom, it's a lot of fun listening to you because you're so well-spoken and so knowledgeable. I've always loved archaeology, just have an instinctual or an innate love for these things that you speak of and history. Anyway, I'm in a time, I grew up as a porter on the Amtrak. I mean, 20 years, and I've met a wide variety of people and traveled the country extensively and have I've gone through ups and downs in life and have experienced miracles. I mean, where God has revealed himself to me. And when you speak of the alien connection and you spoke about Christ and how he could have been, I don't know, just the whole way that he was maybe brought into this world as a star child. But to me, how does that interconnect with us as individuals? I mean, you're so knowledgeable and you know so much. I'm kind of in a time in life where I could use some hope. I mean, I've learned a lot throughout life, and it seems the more I learn, the less I know. And I guess what I'm getting at is God has revealed the miraculous in my life on so many different occasions. And I just wonder how you feel God interconnects with us on that personal level and how we can further ourselves. I mean, I just believe in the Bible, and I believe that those things are true, but sometimes I feel lonely and, like God isn't with me, and then sometimes I feel he's right here with me, and I don't know, what's your take on all that?
Well, I certainly can empathize with what you're saying. I think it does two things. First of all, when we hear about this kind of stuff, it can be frightening, and that's a downer. On the human level, a lot of people talking about the prophecy of the popes, and some of the Catholic friends who have called me, and they don't like the idea that this current pope could be the final one, maybe even somehow play some role as the church goes into the Great Tribulation period. Those are the kind of things that are scary. And then when you talk about the extraterrestrial connection, it reminds a lot of conservative Christians of verses in the Bible where it says that the Antichrist will appear with all lying signs and wonders and fearful sights and great signs from heaven, and men's heart failing them for fear for seeing those things that are coming upon the world. And those things seem to point to the possibility, anyway, that the official disclosure moment may bring with it a great deal of fear. Well, it even does in the Hollywood movies, right? People are they're paralyzed, as I was saying a moment ago. However, people who have strong faith in God look at this a different way. For them, it reminds of their great hope. It reminds that there is a time that was predicted in the Scripture when the Lord's closest disciples said, "Tell us, what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the aeon, the end of the age?" And he tells them all these things, and then he says, as it was in the days of Noah. So signs, giants, all this stuff the American Indians were warning about would be happening again on the earth. But when you see those things beginning to come to pass, then you look up, because your redemption is drawing nigh, and that is our great hope. Now, without getting bogged down in a lot of theology, I have to say that my theology doesn't quite work the same way that a lot of dispensationalists do, and that I think we also could be poised for one of the greatest spiritual awakenings in the history of mankind. And this kind of stuff, when it's negative, it gets you down, it's fear-invoking, causes people to draw closer to God, to seek God.
Of course.
For reassurance, and when they do, you could have another great awakening, and it could be a great time of spiritual awakening and revival.
All right, we go to first-time caller now in Washington, the state of, it's Shadia. Hi there, Shadia. Go ahead.
Hi. Good evening to you, George and Tom.
You too.
Thank you for taking my call. My question for Tom is, do you know that we, the mankind, we are the alien nation in this world? And these UFOs, unidentified flying objects, they came to Earth 400 years before mankind come to this world? Do you know this fact?
Well, I know the fact that, and I would say a lot longer than 400 years ago, that there
maybe
are
400,000.
Yeah, there are clear records in the earliest written and oral records in man's history from cultures around the world of the appearance of these strange craft. Now, I would say that there are 2 points of view, by the way, from what I think are conservative Christian worldview concerning UFOs. There are UFOs that could be of a demonic nature. However,
I believe that.
There's also, however, UFOs that could be of an angelic nature, because people confuse two things. One is alien abduction, and alien abduction has a malevolence around it, and people tend to connect that to all UFO activity, but that really is not true. In fact, last year, George, you had Gary Stearman on your show, the executive producer for Prophecy in the News, and his Stearman family, famous aircraft family. He told you his story of a UFO that basically followed him and kept his crippled aircraft running until he could land it.
Yeah, saved him.
Yeah, I mean, just amazing stories also like that. By the way, the Bible talks about things like God riding on a cloud, his angels using chariots, the Old Testament story of Elisha and his servant. In fact, the term chariot in the Old Testament Hebrew is the Merkavim or the Merkavah. That's a flying vehicle. And sometimes it's visible to our eyes, sometimes it's not. But even the Lord himself is moved about with the Merkavim or the Merkavah.
Hold on, Tom. We're going to hit the break, and I want to come right back and talk more about this. Then we'll take final phone calls with you when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And, of course, our television program is called Beyond Belief. You can watch that. It's on Fridays, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, but you can watch it anytime you want. You can get 10 days free. It's Internet-based. You can also take advantage of some special videos, hundreds of them, that you can watch all for that little nominal monthly fee. But you get 10 days free. And our next guest will be Dr. Barry Schwartz. Barry, of course, is the chief photographer for the Shroud of Turin project. You're going to love this as we go into Easter. He is a home run waiting to happen, let me tell you. So how do you get to it? How do you get the 10 days free? Go to our website, click the hosts, and then you'll see the TV icon open up, and there you are. And welcome back to Coast. Tom Horn with us, of course, his latest book, Exo Vaticana. And, of course, we'll take your final phone calls this half hour as well. If disclosure comes, Tom, if it comes, I've got my doubts, but if it comes, when do you think it could occur?
Well, there are, some of the leaders right now that are saying that it could happen as early as this year. Some of the people that work in the laboratories that are finding exoplanets and things like that. I can also tell you, George, that in the interviews that we did with the leading Jesuit astronomers for the Vatican, we left with the feeling, we were surprised by this, we left with the feeling that they know something we don't know, or they suspect something we don't know. And one point that I wouldn't want lost from the Exo Vaticana investigation is how these Jesuit astronomers They go beyond this whole discussion, UFO discussion, official disclosure, hey, we found life on another planet. What they're describing is a strong belief in morally superior aliens, literally advanced extraterrestrial saviors that they seem to know something about. I mean, they talk as if they know something that's going to happen and that it's imminent, that these things are coming to Earth. They're going to bring, now we're talking about the religious aspects of this, they're going to bring an improved gospel, and they are coming with intentions to evangelize mankind. Funes is the one that made himself famous by saying he would want to baptize an alien. Well, he's singing a new song now. He's not going to baptize the aliens. The aliens are coming here to baptize us. And as a matter of fact, in a paper, this is one of the papers that we publish for the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science. There's a Opus Dei level professor for the Vatican. His name's Father Giuseppe Tanzalaniti. He's a theologian at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, the Pope's university, and he explained how we are going to be evangelized during contact with spiritual aliens. But get this, he states that it's not going to immediately oblige Christians to renounce their faith in God simply on the basis of the reception of new, I'm actually quoting what he wrote here now, of new unexpected information of a religious character from extraterrestrial civilizations. But such a renunciation could come soon after, as the new religious content originating from outside the earth is confirmed as reasonable and credible. Once the trustworthiness of the information has been verified, the believer will have to reconcile this new information with the truth that he or she already knows and believes on the basis of the revelation of the one true God, conducting a rereading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, end quote. Now, he is one of the guys that is crafting the language right now for the highest university level thinkers for the Vatican towards what we believe. Now, we predicted Benedict would resign, and he did. Now we're making a new prediction, and it's a shocking prediction because it has everything to do with a new dogma that will be sanctioned by the Pope, something that needs to be believed by all Catholics, and for that matter, to a larger extent, everybody in the world, having to do with the reality of not just an alien presence, but the moral superiority. That, in other words, these beings aren't fallen like we are. They're closer to God than we are. They're therefore morally superior. And this more complete ET gospel is somehow going to de-emphasize, significantly modify. Basically, Tanzalaniti goes on to tell us that it's basically going to make everything we've ever thought in our pre-Copernican worldview in Christianity obsolete. Basically, almost nothing that we have held as a revelation of God is going to hold out to be true with this new revelation.
All right, let's go to some of the phones. I want to talk to you about the Antichrist before we're off the air with you, Tom. Let's go to Michelle in Niagara Falls. Hey, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, what's the acid test for an individual? I don't speak through middlemen. If God wants to talk to me, I want direct contact, right? I'm kind of fussy like that. The other thing is, people who want to expand the awareness of, about things our government is doing is, I recommend take 250 business cards, print out 3 excellent YouTube video links on those business cards and drop them off in people's cars. And if everybody did that, North America would become really aware really quickly.
Well, that's not a bad idea, I guess, but I don't know what would work, Tom.
Yeah, well, but I like the independence.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, let's go to Carson, California. Hello, Carlos. Thanks for holding.
Yes, good evening, Tom and John.
Hello.
George. Yes, listen, Tom, a question. I'm inclined to believe that our current Pope is probably a secret Mason. I saw a picture of him with his right hand halfway through inside his coat on his left breast. Now, from what I understand, that's some Freemasonic symbol. Also, I believe yesterday he conducted a ceremony right around the obelisk at St. Peter's Square, and according to Egyptian lore, the obelisk is the penis of Osiris, the Egyptian sun god. So why would he be conducting a ceremony, being a Christian, right around the Egyptian, the obelisk, which is situated right in the middle of St. Peter's Square? And on top of that, he being a Jesuit. Now, I understand or heard that the Black Pope of the Jesuits is actually superior to the current White Pope of the Vatican. So, based on all these observations, I don't know. I have a really big question marks regarding this Pope, and also his involvement with the military junta in 1976 in Argentina, where there was massacres and abductions of people and total regime change over there. So this guy has a rather sordid history.
Let's get your reaction to that, Tom, if you want.
Yeah, well, I've read some of the same things, and I know there's supposed to be a loaded gun document that shows that he actually did help the government to keep a couple of Jesuits locked up in a prison where they were tortured. Look, I mean, first of all, this question is coming up a lot on a lot of the shows I'm doing, because people are saying, well, how can he be a fulfillment of the prophecies of the popes? How can he be the false prophet? Or how can he be the pope that's going to take the church into the great tribulation, this great deceiver? His name isn't Peter. He needed to be named Peter the Roman, or he's not the guy. And I always insisted, in fact, I told you this on the show last year, George, and I've told many other shows, that the final pope did not need the Christian name Peter. He only needed to be of Italian descent, which this pope is. Now, there's some interesting things. For instance, he named himself after St. Francis of Assisi, who was a Roman friar, an Italian friar, and Assisi's original name was Giovanni di Pietro Peter de Bernardone, a man whose name can literally be translated Peter the Roman, and that's his namesake. Secondly, he named himself, after naming himself after Francis of Assisi, I found that extraordinary, because Bergoglio's a very smart guy. If he's a Jesuit, he's got degrees both in science and theology. He's no Johnny-come-lately. He's a very intelligent man, and he would know Francis of Assisi and the prophecies of St. Francis of Assisi. And Francis of Assisi said that the final pope, the pope that would lead the church into the Great Tribulation, he prophesied this just before he died. He said he would be a false pontiff. He would be raised to the pontificate, and by cunning, he would appeal to the media. He will appeal to people. But in doing so, he's going to draw people into error and death. He said he'll be a destroyer and not a true pastor. And then the third thing that I would say is that this whole thing about him being a Jesuit, now that's not something that I saw coming, but it is an extraordinary fulfillment of what we wrote in the book Petrus Romanus, because what we wrote was that the term Peter the Roman says something about the final pope. Every pope is the latest Peter in the line. That's what the Jesuits say. But why is he called the Roman? And we said that implied that this pope would reaffirm the authority of the Roman pontiff over the church, and would also emphasize the supremacy of the Roman Catholic faith and the Roman Catholic Church above all other religions and denominations. And that's exactly what the Jesuit order was organized to do. The very thing they were organized to do was to stop Protestantism from spreading and to preserve communion with Rome and to the successor of Peter in the Pope. So we have an extraordinary fulfillment of the prophecy. Now, as far as to the final question, as far as him standing in front of the obelisk is there in St. Peter's Square. Pope Sixtus performed an exorcism that supposedly relieved the obelisk of its Osirian demonism. But that, again, is an extraordinary story all by itself that we probably don't have time to tell.
And almost all the popes stand there, don't they?
Yes, all of them.
Yes. Okay, next up, let's go to Chase in Sacramento, California. Chase, welcome to the program. You are on the air with us.
Hey, My question was actually already answered, but I came up with a new one just because of this when you were talking about it. My question was going to be, when do you think that the gray, that they're going to say, okay, there is an alien life, this is, the new hierarchy. But my biggest question was this: if they do come and the Catholic Church says this is the new face of God, and you guys don't have to convert now, but you will later. I mean, how big of a war do you see that happening? Because a lot of people are going to go, no, this isn't right. This isn't right. I'm Catholic. I'm Christian. I'm Methodist. I'm whatever. And this is wrong. You Catholics are nuts. You're worshiping this new alien deities, and that there be like literally another holy war happening.
Well, look, I think certainly that's possible, but recent polls, for instance, out of the United Kingdom, show that more people now believe in aliens than believe in God. And so, as if the approach to the question is coming from a great deception, I believe that a great deception is coming. And I think that these Jesuits, many of them are sincere, but I think they are unknowingly playing into the hands of a form of great deception. Now, how much of a war will it start? I don't know. The people who believe, for instance, in a pre-tribulation rapture say that the church isn't even going to be here to deal with it anyway. So I guess it would really depend on your worldview and your theology and where you are coming from. But I will tell you this, that nobody's going to read Exo Vaticana and not come away from it believing that there is something extraordinary that is occurring behind the scenes, and the Jesuits, in one way or another, are some part of it. And the fact that we now have a new pope who is the first in history to be both a Jesuit and now a pope, I think is potentially it's going to bring a lot of what we had predicted before we even knew a Jesuit was going to sit on the throne of Peter. It's going to bring it into a stark reality.
And you think this is primarily extraterrestrial related?
Well, they're saying it's extra. I would say it's ultra-dimensional. I would say it's other-dimensional. I've never been a real fan of nuts and bolts technology that they're coming here from far distances, though I realize that is a possibility, and
sure.
it could be using wormhole technology or something like that. But my personal belief is that we're talking about an intelligence that exists around us all at the same time and moves in and out of our reality whenever it wills.
Let's go now to Bob in Buell, Idaho, west of the Rockies. Bob, go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call. The thing I was going to talk about, and then I have an observation if you don't mind.
Sure thing. Go ahead.
I have a friend that is a Navajo shaman, and my wife and I have always believed that there's been a connection, being Catholic, that there's a connection between God and extraterrestrials. Also, we sat around the house with my friend, and he has discussed God and the visitation to the Navajo reservation with extraterrestrials coming down and giving them ideas and teaching them what to expect when they do come back to Earth, or when they come to Earth again. And I have had no problem believing that what he says is true. And my wife came to me in a dream one night not too long ago and said to me that keep an eye on the skies. And she's done this several times since she's passed. And I do believe that the Pope is the right Pope for this time of the year. And there was another Pope that was named to the throne back after Germany surrendered, and he was accused of letting a lot of people die because of the Germans and everything. But then it was also brought forth that he had hidden out a lot of the Jewish people and took them to the underground type and got them out of Germany to save their lives. So, there's pros and cons with this Pope, and like you said, Tom said that their name is Peter. It always is. The first name is always Peter, and then it's Peter Francis or Petrus Francis, or whatever you want to call it.
Minute or so to go, Tom.
Well, yeah, I don't have any comment other than to say that what he's saying was also what we heard from the native tribes that we talked to down around Mount Graham.
Is the Antichrist on the planet now?
I believe that he is, yes. And I'll tell you something else that we don't have time to talk about in 1 minute. But you remember last year when we talked about the prophecy that's in the Zohar?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a 700-year-old Jewish prophecy, but something just came to me. Now, they predicted that the Messiah, who, if you're an evangelical and you think, okay, the Orthodox Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, so this prediction actually talking about the coming of the Antichrist in the Jewish calendar year 5773, which started in September 6 months ago and ends this year in 2013 in September. But one thing that only dawned on me when I was rereading that prophecy is, you remember the rabbi, the famous Kabbalist by the name of Yishak Kaduri?
I've heard of him.
You know, and he died in 2006, but he allegedly said that the Messiah is here. Now, we would say that's the Antichrist, but he said this messianic figure is here. He had met him. And now, Yishak Kaduri was a master of Kabbalah and Zohar. He would have thoroughly knew these prophecies in the Zohar.